The rule of law is more than just a legal term. It shapes how our societies are governed, which in turn impacts the way we live. In this video, we will briefly explore what the rule of law is, why it matters to you, and how the European Union is working to protect and uphold it across its member states. At its core, the rule of law means that laws govern society. This ensures that no one is above the law and that everyone, regardless of their position or power, is treated equally. Therefore, everyone, from the highest-ranking politicians to the everyday citizen, is accountable to the law. This translates into a number of requirements. For instance, the requirements that laws are clear, public, and stable. This means you should always know what is expected of you. It also requires that when you are wronged, or when you feel that the law itself is unfair or unjust, you have the right to seek justice before a court. And this leads us to another requirement, that courts are independent and impartial. In other words, the courts must be able to make decisions without undue influence from other external actors. If this principle is undermined, it can threaten the fairness of the trial and consequently the protection of your rights. Also, the right to seek justice is available to everyone, meaning everyone can access justice regardless of who you are, so without any discrimination. So we can say that the rule of law is the backbone of fairness and justice in our society. Without it, our well-being will suffer because decisions will not be based on law, but could be based on other factors which are not as transparent, objective, or even fair. To understand how the rule of law impacts our day-to-day lives in a more tangible way, we should consider some examples. Imagine a situation where those in power could change the rules whenever it suited them. This would lead to a situation where our rights and freedoms are constantly in jeopardy. So the rule of law ensures that public officials act within the limits of the law and that they are accountable, which means that they can't misuse their powers without facing legal consequences. So this means that law keeps political power in check and not the other way around. Imagine a situation as well where you're buying a home or you're about to start a new job. You need to know what your rights and obligations are, and that in the event of a dispute, there is a process that you can access of adjudication and where the laws relating to property ownership or employment rights, whichever the case, will be applied fairly. So this means essentially the rule of law provides this kind of security in your day-to-day life. But the rule of law is also important from an economic perspective. It protects businesses. Why? For instance, if you run a company, you would want to rely on transparent regulations that apply equally even to your own competitors. Without the rule of law, corruption and favoritism could likely distort the market, which would mean an unfair disadvantage to you. And this could discourage others from starting their own businesses or even discourage reputable foreign companies from investing in the country to the detriment of the economy and therefore the well-being of citizens. So this means that the rule of law also creates a stable environment for entrepreneurship and investment. Why is the EU involved in matters such as the rule of law? The EU is first and foremost a political and economic union. However, it is a political and economic union that is based on a certain set of shared values. The rule of law is one of the most important of these values because it ensures that other values like democracy and human rights are encouraged or can flourish. In fact, upholding this principle is a non-negotiable requirement for joining the European Union, for a country to join the European Union, and in fact it has always been that way. And once states join the European Union, they are expected to continue to uphold this principle. And the EU has ways of ensuring that this does happen in practice. One of these ways is through monitoring and reporting. So what the EU does is every year it releases a rule of law report which assesses how well member states are doing in certain areas such as judicial independence, corruption, anti-corruption efforts, and even how democratic institutions in their societies are functioning. The EU monitors these situations carefully and can, if it feels necessary, take action. So it can escalate the matter. It can do this through what we call infringement procedures, which are legal actions that are brought before the Court of Justice of the European Union in Luxembourg, and which can impose fines and penalties on member states if they are found to be in violation. Another method is the EU withholding funds, EU funds, from member states that are seen to be seriously undermining the rule of law in their national system. But one of the most powerful mechanisms that the EU has at its disposal in this respect is that which we find under Article 7 of the Treaty on the European Union, which allows the suspension of that country's voting rights in the Council. So if a member state is seriously in breach of the rule of law, its rights to influence EU decision-making can be suspended. This sanctioning mechanism has never been utilized, but the fact that it is present in the treaties show that the EU takes the rule of law very seriously. Over the last decade or so, the rule of law has come under threat in the European Union. One prominent example is the ongoing situation in some member states where there have been concerns over government interference in the judiciary. Governments have been accused of trying to weaken the independence of their courts by enacting laws that would discipline judges for the content of their decisions, or by appointing judges who are politically loyal rather than impartial. So this creates a climate of fear among judges and magistrates, and therefore a risk that justice could be influenced by other motives rather than by the law. These events are worrying for the European Union and its citizens because independent and impartial national courts create an environment where member states can trust each other's legal systems. They can trust that their legal systems are of a certain standard and integrity, and that in itself allows them to cooperate in a more efficient manner in areas such as civil and criminal justice. Independent and impartial national courts also ensure that EU law is applied consistently and uniformly across the European Union, since their loyalty is towards the law, including EU law, rather than anything else. This means that you and I and everyone else out there can enjoy the same level of legal protection wherever they are in the European Union. Ultimately, all of this in turn ensures that our right to move and reside freely within the EU region is ensured, and it can be done in a safe and secure manner.